The Backdated, Episode 4, The Clipper Endeavor, April 11, 1952. A plane leaves San Juan, Puerto Rico, bound for New York. Minutes later, it's gone, swallowed by the Atlantic in under 3 minutes, taking 52 people with it. For 74 years, nobody knew exactly where it came to rest. Then, this June, a drone built to hunt undersea mines found it, sitting broken in 2 pieces, nearly 2,000 feet down. This is the Backdated. This is the story of the Clipper Endeavor. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand what flying was like in 1952. Commercial aviation was still young. Jet airliners didn't exist yet for passenger service. The workhorses of the sky were big, propeller-driven planes like the Douglas DC-4, a 4-engine airliner that had started life-hauling troops and cargo during World War II before airlines like Pan American converted them for paying passengers. Flying was expensive, glamorous, and, by today's standards, far riskier. There was no requirement that passengers be told where the exits were, or how to use a life vest, or what to do if something went wrong. Nobody had ever been required to tell them, because nobody had yet been forced to reckon with what happens when you don't. Pan Am Flight 526A was one of those DC-4s named the Clipper Endeavor, flying the overnight route from San Juan to New York's Idlewild Airport, the airport we now call JFK. 69 people were aboard, 64 passengers and 5 crew, most of them settling in for what should have been an unremarkable overnight flight up the Atlantic seaboard. Shortly after takeoff, the aircraft suffered a dual-engine failure, losing power on 2 of its 4 engines at almost the same time. On a plane like the DC-4, losing 2 engines, especially on the same side, was close to a worst-case scenario. Without enough thrust to maintain altitude, the crew had no choice but to ditch the plane in the ocean, roughly 11 miles northwest of San Juan, in the dark, over open water, with dozens of lives depending on what happened in the next few minutes. What happened next is the part of this story that changed aviation forever, and it had almost nothing to do with the crash itself. By every account gathered afterward, the ditching itself was survivable. That's worth sitting with for a moment. All 69 people aboard lived through the impact. The pilots managed to bring the plane down largely intact, and it came to rest floating on the surface of the Atlantic. For a brief window, everyone on that aircraft was alive. But the aircraft began sinking almost immediately, and what followed inside the cabin was chaos. Investigators later determined 3 things went wrong at once, and each one compounded the others. No safety briefing had been given to passengers before departure, so most had no idea where life vests were stored or how the exits worked. Several passengers on board did not speak English fluently, and there was no coordinated way to communicate emergency instructions across the language barrier, which meant that even shouted commands from crew members may not have reached everyone who needed to hear them. And there was no organized evacuation procedure for the crew to fall back on, no rehearsed system, no drilled sequence for getting dozens of frightened people out of a sinking fuselage in the dark, over water, with the clock already running out. The plane went under in less than 3 minutes. 3 minutes is barely enough time to locate an exit on a plane you know well in broad daylight, let alone a darkened filling cabin on a plane most passengers had boarded for the first time that night. The U.S. Coast Guard and Air Force scrambled rescue crews and managed to pull 17 people from the water alive. 12 passengers and all 5 crew members survived. The other 52 passengers did not. 52 people who had walked onto that plane in San Juan never walked off anywhere. 2 names have followed this crash for 7 decades, and remarkably, both people are still alive today. One survivor was a young nurse in her 20s at the time, who investigators credited as instrumental in getting the aircraft door open so passengers could escape the sinking cabin. In the panic and the dark with water pouring in, she is remembered as one of the people who kept a door from becoming the reason more didn't make it out. She is 102 years old now. The other survivor was an infant, found floating alone on the surface of the ocean after the plane went down and resuscitated by rescuers on the scene. Think about that image for a second. A baby, alone, adrift in the Atlantic in the dark, somehow kept afloat long enough to be found. That baby is now in their 70s, having grown up carrying a story most people would find almost impossible to believe, that they survived a fatal plane crash before they were even old enough to remember it, a story that existed for them only secondhand, told by others for their entire life. When researchers finally confirmed the wreckage had been found this year, both survivors were reportedly told directly, and by all accounts, it was an emotional moment neither expected to live to see. 74 years of an unanswered question closed in a single phone call. For most of those 7 decades, nobody seriously attempted to locate the wreckage. The exact location where the Clipper Endeavour went down had never been pinned down with any precision, and the deep, wide stretch of Atlantic off Puerto Rico's northern coast is not a small place to search blind. Without GPS, without modern sonar, without the kind of underwater mapping technology we take for granted now, a 1952 ditching site could simply vanish into the sea's own version of a cold case. The case might have stayed unsolved indefinitely if not for an unrelated discovery in 2019. A luggage tag from the flight washed ashore in Florida, nearly 70 years after the crash. An object that small, carried by currents for the better part of a century, ending up on a beach where someone happened to notice it and recognize what it was. That single artifact caught the attention of Russ Matthews, president of the Air-Sea Heritage Foundation, and sent him down a research path that would consume years of his life. Matthews and his team combed through archival records from Pan American Airways and the U.S. Coast Guard, along with reports from the Civil Aeronautics Board, the federal agency that investigated aviation accidents before the FAA existed. They were essentially reconstructing a puzzle from paperwork that predated modern record-keeping standards, cross-referencing fragments from 3 separate institutions to try to triangulate a single point on the ocean floor. The real breakthrough came from a hearing held in Puerto Rico shortly after the crash, where Air Force pilots who happened to witness the ditching during a nearby training flight had sketched a map estimating where the plane went down. 70 years later, a set of hand-drawn notes from witnesses who happened to be in the right place at the wrong time turned out to be the key. Even with that lead, the ocean didn't give up its secret easily. A previous search attempt using a towed sonar array was called off 2 years earlier after bad weather made the operation impossible. Another reminder that the Atlantic doesn't care how much research and how many decades you've put into finding something. Matthews and his volunteers regrouped and decided to try again before the crash's upcoming 75th anniversary, this time with a newer autonomous underwater vehicle, a piece of technology originally developed for military mine hunting missions, now repurposed to hunt for a different kind of buried history. In June of this year, using high-resolution sonar, that drone finally located the wreckage, the fuselage and a separated tail section resting nearly 2,000 feet down, broken into 2 pieces on the ocean floor. 74 years after it disappeared, the Clipper Endeavour had a location again. The Clipper Endeavour disaster didn't just claim 52 lives, it exposed a gap in commercial aviation that, until that morning in 1952, almost nobody had thought to formalize. Passengers had no idea what to do in an emergency because no one had ever been required to tell them. In the aftermath, regulators moved to close that gap permanently. Airlines were required to give a safety briefing to every passenger before every flight, explaining exit locations and how to find and use flotation equipment, exactly the information that, had it existed on that morning in 1952, might have given many more than 17 people the chance to get out in time. Onboard flotation equipment and evacuation procedures were overhauled as well, turning what had been an informal, airline-by-airline approach into a standardized requirement across the industry. That briefing has become so routine that most travelers tune it out entirely. People scroll their phones, put in headphones, keep reading their book, because it's the most predictable 90 seconds of any flight. It's easy to forget it exists because a plane full of strangers in 1952 didn't have it and paid for that gap with their lives. 74 years is a long time to wait for an answer. Long enough that a baby pulled from the ocean that night could live to be an old man before anyone found the wreck. Long enough that a nurse in her 20s who helped save lives in the dark could be 102 years old when she finally learned exactly where the plane had been resting all along. Long enough that the people who caused this story's happy endings never got to know how the story of the wreckage itself would end. The Clipper Endeavor is found now, but every time a flight attendant points to the nearest exit before you've even left the gate, that's this story, still playing out 7 decades later, for every passenger who never has to sit through what those 69 people went through. If you want us to dig into another case like this one, let us know in the comments. This has been The Backdated.